Hello everyone, thank you for joining. We'll give it another moment just for people to join and then we'll get started. You'll see there's a chat function and a Q&A function that you'll see. And so in the chat function, if people fancy just writing in where they're calling in from, it's always nice to see the spread of people that are calling in. So if you want to use the chat function to say where you're based, that would be that's great. And then there's a Q&A, so any questions throughout this webinar, feel free to pop it in the Q&A chat, and then we can get those answered as well. Nighthead, hi Keith, thanks for joining. I think we'll get started. Hi Peter from Exmoor. Fab. Okay, so hi everyone. So my name is Lizzie. I'm the Beachwatch Manager at the Marine Conservation Society, and we have Emma O'Neill from Plastic Free Falmouth. We have Emily Stevenson from Beach Guardian, and we have Rachel Yates from Surfers Against Sewage. So we're all going to be presenting today on our work in pollution in the southwest. Yes, I'm just going to start by sharing. Hopefully you can all see that. Does that all come up from the speaker so I can see? Can you see the presentation?
Yeah.
And is someone able to pop in who is listening in whether you can see that as well? Just so I can know that everyone can see it okay.
There's a thumbs up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to know. Fab. Thank you. So yes, so welcome to the SWME Plastic Pollution webinar. Just a little bit on what we'll be going through and chatting about today. So I'll be talking about our Beach Watch programme and what the data has been collected by our amazing volunteers shows. There will be a Q&A after my presentation and after each one, so there is an opportunity. So do pop in the Q&A if you've got any questions, and that'll be monitored. And after each presentation, there's an opportunity to get those questions answered. If we're running out of time, it might be that we have to move on, and we'll make sure that we might follow up with those questions. And then we have Rachel, who'll be presenting from Surfers Against Sewage about the Dirty Dozen data and their campaigns that they're running at the moment. And then Emma and Emily will be talking about microplastic works in the Foul River. And obviously there'll be a Q&A as well. So just to start with myself on Beach Watch. So for those who might not be familiar with Beach Watch, it's a citizen science programme. It's been going for over 30 years now, asking amazing volunteers across the UK to monitor what they're finding on their local beach. We have a set methodology, so we hope that people can collect data in the same way, which allows us to compare data from different locations and over different time periods and look at trends over time as well. So we have we ask for, if possible, up to 100 metres of beach surveyed from the last high tide mark to the back of the beach, and a standard form for people to tally everything that they find within that 100 metres. We also align with countries in Europe as well. So in the Northeast Atlantic called OSPAR, but also the EU have adopted this as well. So we can work together and compare data from other countries, which is really helpful because, you know, we all have one ocean, and litter that can end up from our country can end up in others and vice versa. So it's a global problem. So we try and work collaboratively to collect data and get an understanding of the issues. So once our volunteers have sent their survey data over, at the beginning of each year, we look back and see what the data was collected and what it shows. So our data analyst looks at all the data, and then we put that into the state of our beaches report that gets launched around every March time. highlighting what that data showed the previous year and how that reflects on previous years and how that compares to it, and then what solutions we think are needed to try and stop litter getting there in the first place. So I wanted to give you a bit of a UK perspective first. So from 2025's data, we actually saw a 15% decrease in litter compared to 2024, but we are seeing those fluctuations year on year. So there has been a slight decrease, but then the last few years it has been a bit stagnant. So yes, it does kind of do that kind of yearly fluctuations. So at the moment, the UK, we do an average per 100 metres, and that's how we kind of do that kind of comparative on litter. So for the UK, it's 141 litter items for every 100 metres of beach surveyed last year, and with that split within each country as well. Northern Ireland is particularly high, but I should also just caveat that we don't have as much survey data as we would probably like to make a more robust conclusion. So we'd love more survey data in Northern Ireland to maybe get a better scale of the problem. But at the moment, that is what the data shows from the surveys we've had in. And then to zoom in particularly into the Southwest, last year we had almost 200 surveys with 2,883 volunteers collecting and recording 60,174 litter items on their surveys. And it means that there's an average of 125.5 litter items for every 100 metres of beach in the Southwest. And just obviously with the UK, it's 141, so just slightly below the UK average. And then there's 85% of all that data litter that was recorded was made out of plastic and polystyrene, which is about standard for the rest of the UK as well. We get about 80 to 85% is made out of plastic or polystyrene. Interestingly, in the Southwest, we did see a 30% increase in drinks litter compared to 2024. That isn't what we're seeing across the UK. We did see a slight decrease in drinks litter across the UK. So we are seeing a bit of an increase there, which is interesting. But we wanted to highlight still the issue of drinks litter because it's still kind of, I think plastic bottles was in the top 5 in the UK. So it's still something that we're still seeing quite prevalently in most beaches. And then we try and source the litter as best we can. It's always difficult to know in particular where all litter has come from, but overarchingly we have public litter. So these are things that people are using when they're out and about, usually on the go. So you've got your drink can, your drinks litter, your straws, your cutlery, crisp packets, sandwich wrappers, that kind of thing. So we group that into kind of the public that they are consuming those items. But as we know, there's so much single-use plastic that's on the market, it's very difficult for people to make better choices. So we really want to highlight how much single-use plastic is being found that the public kind of are using, and highlighting the fact that more needs to be done to reduce it, so people have better things to be able to use, and that's reusable and items that are recyclable when they are out and about. And then we have non-sourced. So those are things, primarily things that are really, really small that we just can't identify what it used to be. Microplastics being one of them. So that takes up a huge percentage of litter being found. Fishing gear, and then shipping, sewage related debris and fly tipping. These percentages are pretty actually quite consistent with the rest of the UK as well. And then the top 5 items in the Southwest that was found last year. These were plastic pieces, 2.5 to 50 centimetres, plastic caps and lids, plastic food packaging, fishing net pieces, and cigarette stubs. So all 100% of what we found in the top 5 was made out of plastic. And yeah, and a mixture from some things that are single-use plastic to fishing gear as well. So I wanted to kind of go show you the process of what we do with this data, and we call it from beaches to benches because we know the difference that policy can make on affecting really positive change. So from our data, the volunteers collect the data, submit it into our website, we validate it, and then our data analyst analyzes the data, and then our amazing policy and advocacy teams use that data to add them into their policy briefings for governments, parliament, and for public consultations and a call to evidence. We're able to use that data every time those things come up to showcase that more needs to be done. And then our policy team responds using beachwash data to demonstrate the need for change and for research for solutions. And then a government considers responses and evidence and implements policy in light of the findings. And we always celebrate the wins whenever they come up. So at the moment, what's great about our data is that we can see trends over time. So we can see when litter's going up and when there's a problem. And then if there's a policy that's been introduced, we can see if that's had a positive effect. Plastic carrier bags, for instance, we now see around about 80% decrease of plastic carrier bags on our beaches since those bans get put in place, which is really great that they're still being found, but a lot less. So that's really amazing to see. So our governments recognise our data, so they're welcome to see those and see if that policy has had an effect. And then there's been a lot of single-use plastic bans in the last couple of years, which is great. So we are starting to see a decrease of those on our beaches, and hopefully soon we can start have enough data and enough time period to start looking at trends for those particular single-use plastic bans. And then we'll continue to use our data, see what emerging items might be coming up on our beaches, and using that data to showcase where the problem is and what the solutions might be. So what's the change we want to see? So every year when we do the State of Our Beaches report, we also do policy recommendations for litter. So this is a lot longer, a lot more data, and then all our policy asks are in there and sent to all governments across the UK. So we want to see urgent policy change needed to reduce single-use plastics and improve waste management. We support the fact the UK are introducing, finally, a deposit return scheme in October next year, with hopefully to include glass in Wales. So we will keep putting the pressure on to make sure that doesn't get pushed down the line, and that we will launch it next year. And then also wet wipe containing plastic ban will come in England in May in 2027 as well. Something we've been campaigning for many years, with wet wipes really increasing in a lot of places across the UK that our data has been showing. So a really great thing to see, and hopefully we'll start seeing less of those on our beaches in future years. And then we're urging government and industry to collaborate to tackle fishing and aquaculture litter as well. And we've been working closely with organisations like Scotland Islands Federation to start getting more data in particular islands where there's heavily polluted litters, particularly for fishing industry. So we're really keen to make sure that we are getting that data so we can showcase the difference in particular areas that might not be representative of the rest of the UK. Different locations are very different from other areas. Some might find a lot of public litter, some beaches find a lot of fishing gear. We want to make sure that we are getting that data and highlighting it as best we can. And at the moment, we're waiting for the UK government to release a circular economy growth plan, which is something that we've been wanting to see, as really that's a whole system in which this underpins. It's not just single-use plastic, it's single-use items we're producing. We need to have a circular economy plan. So that's what we're awaiting at the moment. I also then just wanted to highlight our Data Explorer. So for the first time ever, we now have a dashboard where people can really play with our data and deep dive into it. So if you head to our website, you'll see in the Beach Clean section, you'll see the Beachwatch Data Explorer, and you can go down to your county, so you can see what data's going all the way back to 1994, and look at trends over time, look at top items, sources, materials, and then you can compare that to other counties as well in the area or other countries. So yeah, really exciting. So I do recommend having a deep dive into that. And if you've got any questions, please do get in touch. We collect litter data throughout the whole year because we want to get that seasonal data as things can fluctuate throughout the year. But we do also have a flagship event called the Great British Beach Clean in September to align with International Coastal Cleanup Day. So this is a global event where countries all over the world do a beach clean and collect data. And we've been feeding into that since Beachwatch started in 1994. So we'd love to get as much data as possible so we can give a really good UK representation for Ocean Conservancy in America to write their global report. So for this year, it runs from the 18th to 27th of September. So I just wanted to flag those dates if people are interested, either become an organiser and run your own clean, or see what's going on in your local area. And people add events onto our website that people can sign up to. So loads of events will get added over the summer. But events run all throughout the year. So if you're interested in taking part, we'd really love data at any time of year so we can get that seasonal distribution. So that's everything that I had to show. So I just wanted to check if there was any questions in the chat for it. Otherwise, I'll pass over to Rachel.
No questions in the chat at the moment, but if anyone does want to ask a question, do pop in now and I'll share it.
That's great, no problem. But yes, we have the Beachwatch email address as well. So we have a great team who can answer any of the questions and that you might have on data or getting involved or anything like that. Stop sharing and I'll pass over to Rachel.
And I'll unmute myself. Thank you. So just bear with me while I share my screen a second and bring up the slides, and then hopefully, again, everyone will be able to see everything. I just need to go into... Okay, I can't see anybody now. So could somebody just let me know, can you see the full screen there? It should say exposing the polluters. Yeah,
I can see the full screen. Yes.
Great, lovely, thank you. Yeah, so oh, thank you, Katie. I've just got your hand. So yeah, I'm Rachel. I'm from Surfers Against Sewage. I'm our plastic pollution campaigns manager here. And like Marine Conservation Society, we spend the whole year gathering data of the plastic pollution that's turning up on the coastline around the southwest, but also inland as well, because as we all know, all of that plastic pollution, wherever it is across the UK, let alone in the southwest, all ends up in the environment, in waterways, and those waterways eventually lead to the ocean. So I'm going to focus more on the work that we've been doing this year to expose the polluters behind a lot of this plastic pollution, as well as looking into some of that data that we collected. So in a nutshell, our brand audit each year looks at what we call the dirty dozen. So that's the top 12 brands that we find polluting our communities across the UK. And this year, it was the 5th year that we did the report. So what we did is we uncovered the current plastic pollution crisis in the UK. And what we found is that there's been a complete government failure to actually crack down on the household brands that are fueling this tide of pollution. Now, we know that it's not just brands that are behind plastic pollution, and we'll go to the breakdown of the pollution that we found in a minute. But this is the focus that we've had through the brand audit and through our campaigns this year. So we analysed the data on the brands pollution and the item types of plastic that we're finding on the beach. But it's more than evidence, it's actually a call to action. So, and we've got a campaign running right now called Return to Offender, which has come off the back of this report, where everybody can get involved and hold those brands and the government to account, because what we need to do is we can be cleaning this up to the end of our days. We're never going to clean all of the plastic pollution out of our green and blue spaces. So what we need is systemic change, and it's the industry and government that are able to do that. So the brand audit is hosted on an accessible online interactive site. We've also got a PDF download. There's a full comms pack that's available and a full campaign pack that's available. So that's all what I'm gonna go through now. So the brand audit, key findings, basically it was our biggest data set yet that we collected through the Million Mile Clean, and same as Marine Conservation Society, plastic was the most prevalent type of pollution that we found in our cleans last year. So through it, we exposed the dirty dozen polluters who were responsible. But this year we did an expose on what they promised to do around plastic pollution and what they've actually not done to address the issue, and therefore the impact of the industry in not taking those actions, and also their active lobbying, which has led to a lack of government action and policy, and the impact that that could have had on the pollution that we found as a result. So the Million Mile Clean is the main driver to this evidence. So this is our ongoing cleanup program. It's not just beaches, it's streets, it's green spaces, it's mountains. And this year we had an impressive almost 7,000 cleans across the UK, attended by almost 160,000 volunteers, and they collected over 72,500 kilograms of rubbish across 330,000 miles. Numbers sometimes bamboozle me when I read them, sorry, but I think that's right. So yeah, it was, as I say, it was our biggest data set yet. Now, out of those cleans, over 2,500 reports were submitted to the brand audit, which I'll go on to the breakdown of what those reports said in a minute. But just looking at our cleans, you can see that a massive chunk of our volunteers are Duke of Edinburgh volunteers, members of the public, plastic-free communities, were 4% of our cleans, regional reps were 2%, and organisations, so that's kind of like community organisations as well, form 7% of those cleans. And you can see here we've got a breakdown of where our cleans take place. 43% are on the beach, so you can see the other percentage is made up from streets, parks, river and mountain. Other, I guess that's people have not felt that their clean location fitted that kind of those locations, but we're averaging around about 19 cleans every day. Now, these are UK stats. I'm not going to go into the Southwest stats because we want to focus more on the actions that we're taking in response to that. But you can access those stats through the Surfers Against Sewage website. So in terms of the brand audit, it was our biggest citizen science data set yet. And over 100,000 polluting items were collected, counted and classified. So first of all, we've got to say a massive thank you to all of the citizen scientists who contributed to the report this year. So the data told us that plastic pollution dominates every location type. Half of all the items found were single-use plastic packaging, and the most single-use packaging was from on-the-go food and drinks, which obviously links us to the brands and the retailers that are distributing all of this plastic packaging. And there you can see a breakdown of the items that we found through the Million Mile Clean. So the Dirty Dozen, when we looked at the brands and in those reports that were sent to us, you will see that this list of 12 is pretty familiar, and it doesn't really change much year on year. We have, brands that move in and out. I don't think Costa are on there this year. They were last year, that kind of thing, but they're not far below on the list. So what we did then is this year, as well as revealing those top brands that are polluting our coastal locations, we also looked at what they're not doing to take action and how they are actively perpetuating the problem. So not a single Dirty Dozen brand met any of their 2025 targets to tackle plastic pollution, and worse, many of those targets were abandoned completely or just ignored. So in the report, again, I'm going to put some links in the chat around this. You can look at the promises that were made. So we looked at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation report and what the brands were saying, as well as the brands themselves, what they say on their websites, the promises that they made for 2025, and looked at their own reporting on this, as well as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And we found failure left, right and centre. If they'd not failed, then they'd abandoned it. There was no information whatsoever, or they'd completely backtracked on it. And nearly half of all of the pollution that we collected through the brand audit in 2025 could have been prevented if DRS and EPR policy had been in place. And that was a result of, and that's also as a result of the powerful lobbying that these brands are doing through organisations that they're part of. So it's not always directly, but it is through the organisations that they're part of. So other evidence that we found, most polluting items here, it was cigarette butts, crisps and sweet packets, so very similar to the Marine Conservation Society stats. And what we have done behind the scenes this year is we've done a massive piece of work on the data we collect and how we collect it, so that our stats are aligning more closely with stats collected by other organisations like Marine Conservation Society, so we can start to cross-reference what we're finding and come together and collaborate when we're putting pressure on government and industry to make the upstream changes that we need to see. So that was a big piece of work that we did behind the scenes around our data gathering. And as you can see here, cigarette butts, microplastics, which we'll hear about in a minute with Emma and Emily, and also ghost gear and fishing related plastic pollution were huge items that we found. So what are our call to action? Well, we are calling for legally binding targets to cut plastic pollution. We want to see policy that tackles the worst polluting single-use plastics with an extension of things like bans, creation of world-leading circular economy, and a ban on toxic chemicals. And what we need to see is when we were at the Global Plastics Treaty last year, the UK government were making some pretty good steps forward and making all of the right noises and all of the things that we would want to see in a global plastics treaty. What we need to see that is at a domestic level. So with the government it needs to stop funding the plastic pollution crisis. It needs to hold these polluters to account, and we need no more policy delay. So the timeline that we've had around this is that on the 19th of March, about a month ago, we launched the brand audit. Then we launched the campaign action, which came off the back of this. This is where we're mobilising the public to put pressure on brands and government. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then we had our Spring Million Mile Clean, which has just come to an end, where we have been kickstarting gathering data for another year. So we gather this data all through the year, like Marine Conservation Society, but we had a big push on it in the spring million mile clean. We will also have our autumn million mile clean, where we'll have another big push on it. And what we'll be doing is we'll be using this evidence and our return to offender content to shape actions around the devolved elections. So right now we're on the road in Wales and Scotland, working on the devolved elections and the community manifestos there. Plastic Free July, we're expecting the circular economy strategy to be released soon, so that we will be able to feed into that. We will be feeding into the Break Free from Plastic Coalition's work on a European level and global level, or working towards whatever the next session of the Global Plastics Treaty looks like, and putting the pressure on a global level there, but also saying to the UK government, you know, we're making all these great notices on a global scale, but what are we doing domestically? And will you hold to your promises there? So return to offender is what we're working on right at the moment to show the public mandate and the anger around plastic pollution. And what we are finding as members of the public, as communities, and as organisations every single day on the coastline around the southwest, but also in our communities. So this launched with the report. It's one of our original SAS plus, it's one of our original plastic pollution campaigns. So some of you who've been members of SAS from the very early days might remember in Pipeline, there would be a little free post address for the brands that if you found any of their pollution on your surf or when you're out on the beach, you could actually physically post it back to the brands and say, hey, we don't want to find this here. This is a digital action this time round. It's really easy. You basically see the pollution wherever you see it, snap it and share it online. I'm going to go through how we do that in a minute. And then these images or videos are shared on social media using the hashtag return to offender and tagging the brands responsible. And that way we expose the polluters and demand action. At Surfers Against Sewage, we're tracking that content and any responses we get from the brands. But online, it creates this user-generated content that puts pressure on the brands from consumers that lets them know that actually we want to see them step up and do their bit to tackle the plastic pollution crisis. So yeah, so it's a public expose of the top polluting brands. We're collating that content generated for our ongoing People versus Plastic campaigns. And we're taking that evidence straight to the government to demand the legislative change and hold polluters to account. So there's a full toolkit available online. There's social media assets, there's logos, pre-drafted copy. We are just refreshing the angle at the moment. We've just been going on, hey, you know, you've been exposed as one of the dirty dozen. We've just found you polluting our local beach. What are you going to do? We are now focusing on the broken promises, and we've got a suite of posts coming up over the next 4 to 5 weeks around promises that have been made by these brands and how they've broken them, that people can use to post with their pictures of branded pollution wherever they find it. And there's loads of tips and tricks on how to get your networks on board and how to make the most of this and make it go as far as possible. So this is just a few examples of what's been posted in the last couple of weeks. It can be stories, it can be Instagram posts. Instagram, because it was what I had the time, it was the quickest things that I could screen grab, but people are showing on TikTok, on Facebook, Instagram, on X if people are still using that, and through stories or posts, any ways that you want to online. This week we are also launching, with this refresh of our messaging around it, we're also launching a template letter. So going back to the kind of free post thing, we're sharing the email addresses and the best way to contact the brands with template letters that people can copy and paste and send to the brand in email if they don't want to use social media. So that will be coming out this week. So how you can help is, yeah, basically get involved. So download and gen up on all the resources for the report, but also return to offender. Share it all with your networks on social media, any other comms, if you have newsletters or meetings, any kind of volunteer comms, anything like that you're doing, and just help us flood social media with this branded plastic pollution to power return to offender. Encourage everyone that you know to do the same. You can also register your cleans with the Million Mile Clean and submit evidence of what you find, because that helps us take your voice and work from the beachfront to the front bench. So our message ever since we started has been around taking the voice of surfers and water users from the coast to the front benches. And we will, you know, we want to do that around plastic pollution. So it helps power our work with MPs and in Parliament around getting the policy and legislative change that we need to see around plastic pollution. Also, another thing that you can do to help is not falling into the litter narrative, and Lizzie touched on it before. It's very easy to blame this on litter bugs. Actually, a small proportion of what we find in the environment and on the coast is down to people dropping it. Marine plastic pollution is a profit over people and planet problem. It's to do with the sheer amount of single-use plastic that's being forced onto us by brands and retailers, and it's due to a lack of government action to crack down on it nationally, but also globally. And it's also due to, you know, not to open another can of worms, but it's also a waste management litter. There's just too much of this stuff being creative that consumers can't avoid and that our waste management systems can't cope with. So I know where I live, down in Penzance, recycling day, our recycling systems are just so, you know, everything blows out, it blows all over the place. I can go down to the prom and the seafront in Penzance and pick all sorts of stuff up that people have tried to dispose of properly, and it's just blown out of our recycling systems. So we can't, we've got to be careful we don't fall into the litter narrative. The other thing is that this stuff has been designed to be discarded, so it's easy to be discarded. So that's something that we can all do to help. And within that, yes, we do have individual and collective responsibility to take action. So within that, our plastic-free communities are doing amazing work to raise awareness with individuals about how they can avoid single-use plastic and pick up, refill and reuse locally. They're working with businesses, how they can avoid giving out single-use business plastic, and try and encourage people to shop locally with those plastic-free champions instead of buying single-use plastic from supermarkets wherever possible. They're working with local councils on local policy to crack down on single-use plastic, and with loads of organisations and schools locally as well. We've also got our amazing Million Mile Clean volunteers. You can see how they've powered this report, who are out 19 cleans a day, cleaning up this plastic pollution and recording it and standing as the evidence so we can campaign on a national level. So yes, we all have a responsibility within that, and we can connect it to these national campaigns that organisations like ourselves, Marine Conservation, and other organisations linked to the Southwest Marine Ecosystems are working on to try and bring the systemic change that we need to see. So that's it from me. So I'm going to stop sharing my window so I can see you all. But if you've got any questions in the chat, I'm more than happy to answer them. And I'll share some links in the chat as well where you can find that information.
Thanks, Rich. We do have a question, a couple of questions in the chat. You've got one question from Katinka, who says, I'm a second-year illustration student from Falmouth University, and I'm working on a conservation-inspired project. I think this question is for either Lizzie or Rachel, so I think either. If you were to have a piece of media encouraging young people to get involved with marine conservation, what would be the main message you'd like for them to hear?
So to get the message, to get involved with marine conservation.
Yeah.
Do you want me to go first, Lizzie, or do you want to?
Yeah, happy for you to go first, Rachel.
Yeah, because I'm on a roll, so I know I've got my answer, and then you've got some time. Yeah, so I've got that. Marine conservation is massive, so there's all sorts of messages that I'd love to give. So I'm going to focus on what I've just talked about. And I think it would be looking at creating the alternatives to the systems that we have right now. So if they want to get involved with marine conservation, be an example of how things can look different, and tell everybody around you and document that. So storytelling, and whether they want to get involved in digital storytelling or talking to people in their community, you know, the simple things like you know, using refill coffee cups, using refill bottles, choosing not to buy fruit and veg in plastic packaging, and tell people around them, doing whatever they can in their own sphere of influence, documenting it, and then rippling it out to as I say, those people around them. There's no money can buy that. And we are talking about systemic change because we need that as well. That is the ultimate. We need legislation, we need industry and government to step up. But actually, we cannot take the agency or the power away from ourselves as individuals, as communities, as to what we can do, because actually we do hold the power in that, and we're consumers at the end of the day. So that would be my message that I would love to get across. And I think young people, oh my goodness, you've got all of the sway in this, and you are the future. You're the future consumers, for want of a better word. I'd love to get away from that language as well. So anything around that I share the backside out of.
Yeah, I agree. I think I was just thinking, I say a few times when people ask about that, is that the problem is that we as a society have caused it, but because of that, it means that that's a good thing, because it means we can reverse it. We have that power. It hasn't just happened without us. So I think it's just trying to have that kind of ocean optimism. I think we need when things can look a bit overwhelming, and I think that is kind of the message, is that we can all do this because we've caused it in the first place, which is pretty much similar to Rachel's.
Thanks, Lizzie and Rachel. We've got another question from Kay. She says, is the curbside collection of single-use plastic, I think referring to soft plastics, starting next year going to undermine the work of all those organisations working to stand against it?
To stand against plastic pollution? Oh, this is a tricky one, because, and I think, again, Lizzie, you'll probably agree that, you know, recycling's got to be the very, very last resort. Recycling is not the solution. It's part of what we need to be doing. And if it's being recycled in a truly circular system, and a circular economy, there's an argument for it. So policies like DRS and EPR, which we've been campaigning for, they're really important, but they're underpinners. They're not the be all and end all. So we've got to be really careful with these recycling narratives. And there is a danger that because people think, oh, it's okay, I can recycle this stuff, that it does kind of detract from the actual real work that needs to be done to stop this stuff being produced in the first place. It would be interesting to see if curbside recycling of soft plastics makes a difference to what we find in the environment. I'm not convinced it will, but it would be interesting to see. It would also be interesting to see what happens and where all of these soft plastics are going, and also what happens to people's attitudes and behaviour change. It's a tricky one, because it's not a solution. Personally, if I can speak personally, I'd rather see effort going into reducing the availability of flimsy plastics, and all of that money and effort being put into reuse and refill systems, because that's the actual solution.
And yeah, Keith has said, when we post on social media, there's always a backlash on people saying it's not the companies, it's the consumers. I try to explain that litter nowadays has too much plastic, which is the problem. So I think it's more of a statement of the problems encountered when sharing on social media.
Oh, yeah, we've seen that with digital return to offender, which is why, as you'll see on our platforms, that we've been incorporating this litter narrative in our comms. There are people who drop rubbish, you know, and we're never going to get away from that. There will always be, in any change model or any campaign, there will always be a group of people that are not going to change what they do, and they might over time, but then another group of people will come in and do the same thing. So there's, you know, but so we have to go back to the root cause, and the root cause is too much plastic packaging and too much single-use packaging, because it's not just plastic as well that is being created. That is the issue. So yes, we can do as much awareness around litter as we want to, but the reality is the vast majority of people don't drop litter. The vast majority of people don't want to see it. The vast majority of people don't want to be buying single-use packaging, but don't have any option. It's quite a privilege to be able to go out and choose to buy your stuff plastic free. And it's not easy if you don't live in, for example, a plastic free community, where a plastic free community is specifically working on making that available to people locally. So it's a really complex, there's lots of moving parts, but that's why I included in my presentation, we've got to be very careful with this litter narrative. And actually we're all part of getting that information out, that you cannot constantly blame consumers. The word litter was coined by industry to shift the blame onto consumers. You know, suddenly it's our problem, and not taking any responsibility for the packaging pollution that they're pumping out. That's what needs to change. That's why we need EPR, and that's why we need this legislative change.
I think that's all the questions in the chat. If anyone's got any last ones, do pop them in either in the Q&A or the main chat.
Okay, so I think Emma, I think you're up next.
Yep, thank you, Lizzie. Hi, everyone. Just bear with me while I share. There we go. Can everyone see that okay? Speakers,
Yes,
and
yeah,
thanks,
I can see
Katie. I can see the thumbs up. Brilliant. So yeah, my name's Emma. I'm the community lead for Plastic Free Falmouth and have been since 2023. And we're a small volunteer group and we're all really passionate about tackling plastic pollution, particularly at its source by working with our community to reduce plastics locally, but also connecting with the national movement of plastic free communities with Surfers Against Sewage. So I'll just talk a little bit about the FAL and the types of pollution that we find in that. And then Emily from Beach Garden will be talking a bit more about our project. So the FAL is part of the Fal and Helford Special Area of Conservation. It's got loads of intertidal mudflats, sandbanks, mill beds. But like many marine areas, it is really affected by plastic pollution. So a lot of organisations locally find like sewage discharge plastics, plastic packaging, polystyrene, netting, and other fragments, and it kind of mirrors what the MCS and SCS find in their cleans as well. But more recently, Clean Ocean Sailing and Plastic Free Falmouth were getting reports of unusually high numbers of plastic pellets, in particular biobeads in certain areas. So to understand why the Fal estuary is a bit of a hotspot for this particular type of microplastics, I'll first go through like what biobeads are and how they're used and why we find them not just in the Fal but also all over the UK. So biobeads are similar to nurdles, which also known as mermaid's tears, which some of you might know about, and can often be found alongside each other. But nurdles are smooth, usually rounded plastic pellets, and they can be any colour. But biobeads are a little bit different. They're a bit rougher, more dimpled surface with sort of flat edges. They're more cylindrical and are usually black, grey, blue, white, but can vary in colour, especially when they're out in the environment. They can get worn down, so the shapes and colours really do vary, and it can be quite hard to tell biobeads apart from nurdles. But they are very different, and they do come from completely different places. So nurdles are small plastic pellets used to make plastic products. So they're pre-production plastics, and they can escape into the environment, into oceans and waterways from, storage to any sort of part of the plastic supply chain, through to transport, really. Biobeads are very different, and they're a type of plastic pellet used by water companies in wastewater treatment, and they end up in an environment where containment systems designed to sort of keep them in the tanks potentially fail. And biobeads are a number of different types of plastic biomedia used in wastewater treatment. And some of these include plastic discs, polystyrene balls, which are also called biosteers, which are also used in some sites in the southwest. But biobeads are the most prevalent biomedia that we see along our coastline in the southwest and our waterways as well. It's really worth noting that Claire Wallerstein and the Cornish Plastic Pollution Coalition did an awful lot of work on highlighting the biobead problem, particularly in the southwest, in a report in 2018. So anyone that wants to learn more about biobeads in the southwest, please do go check out the report, and we'll share a link in the chat as well after the presentation. So how are biobeads used? So biobeads are sort of commonly used in open air tanks, and these are called BAF media tanks, and it provides a later stage of treatment of wastewater. So after getting rid of the sort of big stuff and the solids are settled, it provides the biological stage. So they've got this textured surface and a really high surface area to volume ratio, and this gets colonized by bacteria, which forms a biofilm around the bead, and this is a really robust biofilm. And the bacteria helps break down pollutants in the water, removes contaminants, and they also pump air bubbles up through the filter to create an aerobic environment, which helps them break down and process all of that. And the beads are often held in tanks by mesh screens, allowing the treated water to then pass through out of the system. And biobeads have been used since sort of the early 1990s. potentially as a solution to new standards that were set out in regulations in 1989. They were quite cheap to produce. They produced really high quality effluent, and they could be used in sort of space restricted areas, which often are a problem in coastal treatment plants. But we do know that there are quite a few problems related to biobeads. So many bath sites are now approaching 30 years old, and the problem with this sewage problem throughout the UK is kind of mirrored in the biobead problem, and a lack of water industry underinvestment is creating a higher risk of containment failures. We also know that the beads wear down over time, and this increases chances of them leaking through mesh potentially. And there's an unknown potential for microplastic releases, and we're not aware of any research into this at the moment. They also sit at the end of the treatment line as well. So because they're in that later stage, there's sort of a bigger risk that they're going to be released into the environment if the containment fails. And the CPPC report in 2018 found that there were really high levels of lead, antimony and bromine, as well as polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which actually have been linked to cancer, which sort of indicates that likely these biobeads produced in the 1990s may have been made from recycled electrical waste. But the companies that did make them from France are no longer operational. So another problem is that the beads are really efficient at creating this biofilm around them, but unmanaged in the environment, they also encourage the growth of potentially antibiotic resistant bacteria. So they're a bit of a risk of also absorbing chemical contaminants as well. And they also cause havoc when they're released into the environment. So the beads are essentially an oil spill in sort of plastic form. They float and can be easily ingested by marine animals, and their small size means they're really incredibly hard to clear up, even with equipment and vacuums. They are really, really hard to clear up, and to not remove the substrate, such as sand or organic matter underneath them. Yeah, really, really hard to clear up. Unfortunately, even with this, there is a substantial lack of regulation over the use of biobeads in the UK. So they're pretty much like unregulated that we know about. There's no accountability framework when accidents or breakdowns happen. And we're not aware of any fines being handed out by the Environment Agency after investigations into spills. Yeah, so the next slide. So it's worth mentioning it's not just a one-off. So there are large spills that have happened in 2025 last year. I'm sure quite a few of you have heard about the spills in Camber Sands, but we also had a spill here in Falmouth, in Newham, in Truro in 2010. But the problem is much more systemic. And there have been reports of biobeads all across the UK, and even plastic discs, for example, in Scotland and Wales. And a Surfers Against Sewage public biomedia survey in 2025 found 30 reports of occurrences of biomedia throughout the UK, 13 of those being in the southwest. And you can still take part in this survey if you've ever found biomedia in places where you live. So we'll post the link in the chat for you to have a look as well. And in a CPPC report, they found on every Cornish beach surveyed, they found the presence of biobeads and potentials of smaller spills in treatment sites in Uplim, Liskeard, Modbury and Plympton. So yeah, it's definitely not an isolated one-off incident, and they're being found across our beaches. So yeah, I'll go into a little bit about the spill we had in the Fell and the impacts that has had. Since 2010, at the Newham plant near Malpas and Truro, steel mesh holding beads in the tank in one reactor split, releasing an entire reactor worth of beads into the estuary. We think there was about 5.4 billion released. And one of the major problems with this spill is that South West Water were initially unaware of the spill. It was actually reported by a member of the public and then investigated by the Environment Agency, which led to a bit of a delay in the response to sort of dealing with the spill happening in real time. South West Water conducted a cleanup pretty soon afterwards. and the biobead reactors have now been decommissioned and replaced with a new technology now. So we have no longer biobead use in at that particular plant. But it is thought that the cleanup by South West Water was unlikely to have retrieved all of the beads. And pretty soon after the spill, they were being found in a nearby tributary at Tresillian already. So likely they would already have spread across the estuary. So just to go through a little bit of how beads are used at the moment still in the Southwest, they're still used in 8 South West Water sites and 2 in Wessex Water. And we're not aware of any time scales or plans we know to phase those sites out. And we do have some concerns about South West Water bead recycling scheme to sort of recycle old beads into slightly larger beads so they can still be used in those plants. But yeah, I think that's it for sort of setting the scene of the biobead problem at the moment. So I'll hand over to Emily to talk through our research actually in the FAL. And I think we'll save questions until after Emily's gone through that. But thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Lovely job. Thanks, Emma. And thank you so much, Rachel and Lizzie, for fantastic talks. Before that, I will just share my screen and pick up where Emma left off. Can you guys see this okay? Fab, I've got a thumbs up. Yep. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Dr. Emily Stevenson. I'm the co-founder of Beach Guardian and also a marine biologist working with the University of Exeter and the University of Queensland. And I really don't want Emma's statement to be underestimated. The problem of biobeads in the Fal estuary system is absolutely critical, and this is what it currently looks like. So you can see there are millions and millions of these biobeads and nurdles and other plastic particles existing in the Truro River system at the moment. And what I'm going to talk about is a collaborative project that we've been working on for the past couple of years to try and understand this pollution and hopefully mitigate it. So the study area, of course, this is the area between Truro and Falmouth, the river system here. And let's go into a little bit of background of course, how was this pollution discovered? Emma's already explained that the mass spill of biobeads occurred at the Newham plant in 2010. And Beach Guardian has been noticing the spill of biobeads in this top area of the river here, nearest to Truro, nearest to the wastewater treatment plant, which is up in Truro. Since about 2018, we started noticing it. And just to sort of show some evidence of what we were seeing all those years ago in 2018, those biobeads are really encrusted into the riverbank right up in close to Truro city. But then also Clean Ocean Sailing have been monitoring the area by the King Harry Ferry, again since 2018-2019, and similar sort of quantities of biobeads, nurdles and other microplastics. And of course, Plastic Free Falmouth has been looking at the biobeads on the sort of coastal environment. So between these 3 organisations, we already knew that biobeads and microplastics existed in this river system, but actually it's just anecdotal evidence. We know it's there, but we don't have data, and data is absolutely crucial in regulation, mitigation, and understanding how this pollutant acts and behaves in the environment. So between Beach Guardian, Clean Ocean Sailing, Plastic Free Falmouth and the University of Exeter, we formed the Fal River Microplastic Pollution Working Group with some other organisations that are operating in the area. And what we really wanted to do is work with young and emerging researchers at the university to start developing some data. After years of us seeing it firsthand, we wanted to have that categoric definition of where the microplastics were and where the biobeads were. So think last year or maybe the year before, we were really lucky to have 4 students working with us. Tara, Hannah, Lucas and Liana were absolutely fantastic, very dedicated undergraduate students that spent a lot of time over the winter months doing a lot of sampling and monitoring of the microplastics in this system under the supervision of Brendan Godley. And the aims of this work were to assess the abundance of microplastics, identify the distribution of biobeads, and identify where's it coming from. We know where it's coming from. It's coming from the wastewater treatment plant spill, but are there any other sources of plastic in this system? So what the students were looking for are the biobeads. As you now know from Emma, these originate from wastewater treatment plants. The nurdles, they originate from the plastic manufacturing industry. And then fragments, just fragmented bits of plastic that were once larger items. And that's probably originating from litter or other human-derived sources, potentially fishing sources as well if you've got fragmented fishing nets. But it's really those biobeads that we're interested in because we've got a pretty good idea of where they're coming from. So the method of the students was to basically go out into this environment to as many different locations as they could. Because of the restrictions of funding, they only really had about 3 months available to do the sampling. And in that space of time, they did 28 sampling expeditions, which was just a fantastic effort, especially combating the weather. And basically, once they got into an environment, and this was, of course, really supported by the volunteers of Plastic Free Falmouth, they really helped the students, and Clean Ocean Sailing, taking the students out on kayaks to actually get to those inaccessible coves. They get down there and they make a transect to basically measure out the beach or the tidal area or the space that they're monitoring. And they put down a quadrat at 10%, 50% and 90% measurements so we can derive an estimate of microplastic concentrations per location. And in some locations, you would just be picking up plastics forever. So we had to set a time limit of 15 minutes of counting between 2 people per quadrat. So we're getting nice, consistent data per location. And then once they'd collected all of these samples, it was back to the lab. And that's where the sorting effort began. So picking out the biobeads, the nurdles, the fragments, and any other macroplastics, so plastics bigger than 5 millimeters, so that we can count them essentially. And from this, we get a really nice data set of these different types of plastics in different locations. I'm going to show you some of the results from the students. What I will say is that these haven't been peer reviewed. This is their work, it's within their thesis. We do aim to put this out in publications, so please don't share this widely. But they did some fantastic work and they are cited, so it's their work. And I just wanted to show you what they got up to. So first of all, did we find any hotspots of biobeads? This map that you see on the screen, this is our study site. Each circle is a study location, a sample location, and the number of biobeads is represented by the size and darkness of the circle. So when you've got a really big dark circle, that's where you've got a hotspot of biobeads. And you can see just from this image really clearly that there are some accumulation points of biobeads in the Fal River system, especially this area by sort of above the King Harry Ferry. You've got this area where there's lots and lots of biobeads accumulating, and you can see this in the plot that I've just added to the screen here. So as you go from left to right, that's distance from wastewater treatment plant, and each point is number of biobeads. You can see it just kind of like starts off high, goes down and then peaks. So they're obviously getting trapped in this area where we're seeing the hotspots. So that was a really nice representation of this accumulation of biobeads in the upper region of the river. They're not actually getting out into the coastal environment as frequently as those encountered in the upper regions of the river. So we actually took the students' data and we gave it to Dr. Tom Scanlon, who's a very, very clever person, much more clever than me, and he put their data into a complex model which takes into account depth, temperature, tidal movements, and tracks movements of particles in aquatic systems. And he was able to model what would have happened in the days after that 2010 spill. And this is a really good representation of how those microplastics are just sort of getting stuck in the upper regions of the river, which is mirrored in our results. What I will say about this is there is one flaw of the model, and that it doesn't take into account the beaching effects of microplastics. So when you watch, just imagine that some of those particles will be beached and embedded into the riverbank, and that means that they would stay there for longer. So this is, the spill has just happened, and where you see sort of red-orange colours, that's a high density of particles. The blue colours, they're the lower density of particles. But you can see, you know, the spill's happened and mass quantities are staying up in the upper regions of the river there. Even with each tidal movement, they're pretty much just staying up in those areas closer to Truro. There are some particles spilling out, and that's obviously, you know, as Emma was saying, if South West Water didn't respond immediately, they're not going to get those ones that went out into the environment, and that's probably why we see such high quantities of biobeads on Cornish beaches, as well as other spills in the past. So yeah, that model is a really fantastic way of visualizing that trapping, that accumulation of biobeads up towards the Truro, to the city of Truro and towards the wastewater treatment plant. So this is another fantastic plot. I'll explain it a little bit. So instead of just looking at biobeads now, let's look at all 4 types of plastics that the students were looking for: the biobeads, the fragments, the macroplastics, and the nurdles. And this is divided into upper, middle, and lower regions of the river system. It's really easy to interpret. You can sort of see where you've got the most amount of those plastics in different areas of the river. What I would like you to concentrate on are the biobeads and the nurdles, which I've highlighted on the screen. You might think that's a mistake and that the same data was put in twice, but it's not. That is the data. We are seeing exactly the same pattern of biobeads as we see for nurdles. They're all accumulating in the upper areas of the river, but there is no plastic factory, to our knowledge, in the upper area of the Truro River system. We have searched far and wide to see if there are any plastic industries in the area, and so far have found nothing. So this leaves us wondering, why are there nurdles here? Why are there nurdles at such high concentrations that mirror those of biobeads? We know millions of biobeads spill into the river, so that makes sense, but why nurdles? And we think, and what we're now moving on to investigate, is potentially some water companies might be supplementing biobeads in wastewater treatment plants with cheap nurdles because it just increases the bulk amount of plastic. Of course, these nurdles aren't designed for the purpose of being a biological filter, but it will increase the surface area of the reactor. It will do some of the job that the biobeads do. We don't have any conclusive evidence on this yet, but that is our current working theory. So what are the next steps for this project? It did above and beyond what we were hoping. We got some fantastic data. The students did a brilliant job And what we want now is more students and more data, because of course there's always more to be done, and we have a lot of data for the upper and middle section. We'd like to investigate the biobeads and microplastics in the more coastal areas, and then use this evidence to increase cleanup efficiency, but also inform legislation on the use of biobeads and other biomedia wastewater treatment plants, and then investigate that mystery of the nurdles. And just to end, this isn't just a legacy problem from 2010. As Emma touched on, spills are happening now. I was lucky enough to go up to Camber Sands last week, and this is what the beach is looking like following a spill of biobeads. And this is after a cleanup effort has gone through. It is completely pervasive, and it's something that needs to be done at legislative level to stop these spills happening into the future. As the climate crisis continues, more spills will happen, so we need to tackle this. But yeah, that's all I've got to say, and now we can take some questions for me and Emma.
Thank you both. So there is Peter's popped a question in the chat asking which Wessex water sites are using biobeads. I think that was from your section of the presentation, Emma. I don't know if you have that information to hand.
Yeah, I think it's Kingston Seymour and Chiltern Trinity. So I think it's those two sites, and that was from a freedom of information request last year.
Thank you. And just an observation that you know, Katie thought Watergate Bay was bad, but that's astounding. I have to say that that initial image that you shared, Emily, is oh, well, it's just upsetting, isn't it? Really, it's just like, you know, yeah. And going back to Camber Sands after the spill there was in November, and just still seeing so many beads on the beach, it's a massive issue. Has anybody else got any questions that they want to ask that they can pop in the chat or the Q&A section? For Emily or Emma? I don't think so. Okay. Fascinating presentation. So shocking. Yeah, that was the word that I was looking for. Shocking and upsetting. Just before I finished kind of fielding questions in the chat, this webinar is part of the SWME annual report. There's an annual report comes out every year, and this is hosted by the Community of Practice on Plastic Pollution. So if anybody in the call today is more interested in that work and wants to join the Community of Practice, just get in touch with us, because we'd love to have you. The Community of Practice is open to anybody in the Southwest working in the field of plastic pollution, so do drop us a line. But I'm going to hand over back to Lizzie now.
Thank you. So yeah, I was just wanting to, sorry, there we go. Just want to say a massive thank you to all the presenters and for everyone from listening today, and for your really great insightful questions. So this is a slide just to give our names, who we're, where we're from, and then our contact details. So if you do want to get in touch with any of the work that we're doing and have any further questions or getting involved, or just would like some more information on the data, then there's all the information up there, and we'd all be really happy to answer any questions you have. And just, yeah, massive thank you everyone for joining. Take care everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone.